Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to all of you. It's so nice to have such a really wonderful turnout today. We realize we are going head-to-head with the biggest Irish event of every calendar year down in Holyoke. But maybe the weather helped us today, right? And it's so nice to see some faces that we saw as recently as Friday over in Northampton at the annual observation at the monument for Halligan and Daly, the two Irish immigrants who were wrongly accused, convicted, and hanged for a crime they did commit. And if you have any interest in that, the Northampton Historical Society has a page on their website about it. It's well worth reading that story if you haven't heard it before. I'm Sam Hannigan. Most of you know me. Some maybe on the YouTube will not know me. And I usually give an introduction where I talk about how our organization began, which was on the heels of the Blarney blowout in 2014, when we saw so much drunkenness and just an awful look for the town. And because it was tied to this notion of Blarney and being Irish, we found it offensive, and we thought we would start this organization to send another message. But I think because of how the Blarney blowout was again in the news this year, I think it might be necessary for me to talk a little bit about all of the things that combine with drinking in a college town. And if you will allow me a few minutes, I'd like to just tell a story about that, a personal story. So I have both the Amherst and the Irish part of the Amherst Irish Association. My roots here in town run deep. My father went to work at Amherst College in 1940. He worked as a janitor in the Alpha Delta House, which is on the corner of College Street and Boltwood. The fraternities are long gone in Amherst. He was something of a big brother to the boys of the fraternity house. He was 29 years old, and he was smoked a pipe. He was pencil thin, and those boys were probably all around 19 or 20 years of age. And so there was a lot of affection between the boys and my father as kind of a big brother figure. And he did mention a few times how deeply he felt the loss of them, because although those boys did engage in underage drinking in Amherst in the spring of 1940, by the spring of 1944 and 45, many of them were gone forever. And he was close to that. At any rate, one morning my father showed up for work at the Alpha Delta House, and the lawn was trashed, and the windows were all open, and there were curtains blowing out the windows, and there were articles of clothing scattered on the lawn, and there were empty glasses and shoes and whatever you name it, and the boys had themselves ready to go out the night before. So my father set about cleaning things up and putting things back together. And the one thing that he did rescue from the lawn was this. It's an 80-year-old beer pitcher. And so I thought I'd bring that along to show you this connection of being Irish working class in a college town is a theme that we have explored in depth here with our connection with Margaret Marr, the maid in the Dickinson household. And I think that the problem of college kids learning where their boundaries are, especially with alcohol, is something that will be as eternal as the town. As long as the town lasts and it does the business that it does, that's something that we're going to have to reckon with. And the affection and the bonds and the friendships that we can create between the kids while they're here and those of us who make this our home, I think that's what we really need to focus on. And I'll just leave it at that and invite Íde to come in and begin your speech.
Thank you. Welcome everybody, fáilte roiz. Agus banachtaí na féile páidí. The blessings of St. Patrick upon you. And while we won't be talking about Patrick today, we'll be talking about Declan. He actually preceded Patrick in Ireland, so he was ahead of the posse, but more on that anon. Sam mentioned our visit with the Halligan and Daly Memorial, where Kathleen Joss was singing the national anthem in Irish. John Sheehan and Maureen, who are regular members, can't be with us today. And a few other members who are, have other commitments on this particular weekend. But we do want to acknowledge our members, because we're here because of you and because you show up to support us when we try to do various things. So, Gurmina Mahagwave, Agus Fáilte Roiz, John. Thank you and welcome. Okay, so the topic today is pilgrimage, and with a focus on St. Declan's Way. And in the context of that topic, I wanted to start by just making a few points that are particular to my interpretation of some of these matters, okay? First of all, I should declare myself, I should come out as somebody whose spirituality is much more of the Celtic elemental. I'm culturally raised Catholic, but my spirituality comes from that elemental Celtic Mother Nature solid roots, in my view. And I wanted to start by saying that in ancient Ireland, it was primarily an oral tradition. So we need to be very careful about the sources that we consult in relation to what happened pre the sacred text being written. We know that the early Irish did not have a written language, notwithstanding the use of ogham or ogham, as you've heard. There's markings on stone that depict particular types of trees that then related to letters of the alphabet. But for those in ancient Ireland, oral narrative tradition was their way of communicating culture and history. With the arrival of Christianity in the 5th century then, came the written record, when aspects of Irish culture from the oral tradition were written down for the first time, often in sacred texts. Therefore, since we must rely on Christian texts to help us understand ancient Ireland, we need to be alert to what Professor Bob Maher, a great friend of ours and somebody who's presented here often, he's a specialist in early Christian Ireland, and he reminds us that these early Christians incorporated and or blended the established pagan stroke Druidic traditions into Christian practices. So that our topic today, the idea of pilgrimage, may well have been an Irish pagan Druidic tradition, which is what I'm proposing, adapted by Christians, especially in Celtic regions. Building on that point, I'd add that many Irish people head to Spain to complete sections, or indeed all of the 500 miles of the Camino de Santiago, the Way of St. James, leading to the shrine of the Apostle of St. James the Great in the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela in Galicia, in northwestern Spain. Galicia is considered one of the original Celtic nations, along with Ireland, Cornwall, the Isle of Man, Brittany, Scotland and Wales. More on that anon too. So you see where I'm setting my case out here. Stay with me. Why this topic and why now? In July, I plan to walk St. Declan's Way in the place of my birth to mark my emergence from the pandemic and my transition from teaching to writing again full time. I have a new book project in the works. My companion on this journey in July is my old school friend Loretto. I've known her since I was 11 years of age. Loretto is the principal of a huge primary school in Swords, which is north of Dublin City. If you visited your son, it's above the centre. Okay, been to Swords. She lives there with her man Miles and 2 sons named Michael and Patrick. I dedicate this talk today to that little family. Okay, so the format. First, I'll offer a list of sources I've consulted that you may find helpful, and Tim will always put these presentations up on our website, so if you want to consult it or if you want to take a screenshot when it's up there, please do so, but we can get them to you if you want to follow up on them. Then I consider the idea of pilgrimage and explore its origins. After that, I think about and talk about the particular characteristics of an early Irish pilgrimage. And we'll then talk about particular places on Declan's Way, which runs from Cashel in County Tipperary, Cashel of the Kings as it's known, right to the coast of Wexford, or Waterford, Ardmore, right by the ocean. It's 73 miles long. I'm in training since February. Wish me well. Okay, so the sources I've consulted and those you may wish to consult range from one's more to do with archaeology and ancient Ireland, particularly O'Riordan. I notice the script is very small there, but you'll at least get the website for the St. Declan's Way itself too. And I'll talk about the Thuras Dánama people. The Thuras Dánama, the Thuras is the Irish word for pilgrimage, and it's the same word for journey. So Thuras Dánama, Anam is soul. If you remember John O'Donoghue, the philosopher, poet, that wonderful man, died way too young. His Anam Cara was his first collection. So Anam, soul, Cara, friend. Sean O'Doyle, I mentioned him before, Anne, if you remember, with the presentation on Bridget. He passed away now, but he was a monk at Glenstall and wrote some wonderful work about that transition from pagan Druidic Ireland to early Christian Ireland. And Bob Maher's talk is available. Tim does stellar work uploading the film of our presentation, so you can go back and consult Bob's talk there. Okay, yeah. Okay, pilgrimage. The word itself has its roots in Latin. Peregrinus, per, through, and ager, country or land. Therefore, it implies a physical journey through a landscape to enable an inner spiritual journey and a time for reflection on life itself. Many religions support and promote the idea of pilgrimage and support their ideas, their followers, engaging in a pilgrimage. For the Muslims, the Quran calls for them to visit the holy city of Mecca in Saudi Arabia, and it's a journey every adult must make once in a lifetime. For Jews, they're instructed in the Hebrew Bible to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem three times a year. You know, there's that phrase, next year in Jerusalem. My best buddy in America is Elise Kaufman of New York. I learn about these things. And for Christians, the pilgrimage involves a travel to holy sites for healing or for penance. In Spain, I mentioned the Camino de Santiago, which actually in its day had indulgences could be won by making the pilgrimage. Now, indulgences I always think of as the banking brownie points towards against sins. And there's a fascinating sect of Christians who split away from Catholicism at this stage, the Cathars, and they're around the area where Annie and I go to in France, in the Pyrenees, a place called Quillon, and more on that anon, but there you go. Rome will get its money. Lourdes in France is where the children witnessed Our Lady and was a really popular site. My mother never travelled out of anywhere until I came to America. The only place she'd ever been was Lourdes. And she'd go every year to help people in wheelchairs and so forth access the waters with the idea that they might be healed or at least have some relief, immersing themselves in the blessed water. And within Ireland, another very popular site of Christian pilgrimage is Knock in County Mayo. Again, Our Lady appears. She does it. All right, we'll follow me through my thought she is in the Irish. Okay. In pagan times, people gathered during major lunar phases, the solstice and the equinox. And I believe they did so to collectively witness these phenomena and engage in rituals. Over time, communities associated with particular sites as places of extraordinary energy, not only spaces of assembly, but also sacred spaces. What these early Irish people could not understand, they revered, and they revered together. For example, you will remember that I spoke in another Amherst Irish presentation about Newgrange in County Meath. Do folks remember that? It's a Neolithic site, 5,000 years old, where the architecture is so precise that its womb-like chamber is illuminated by the sun on the winter solstice in December 21st. 5,000 years ago, and they figured it out. The photographs are all my own unless I mention the attribution. Neolithic sites in Ireland, such as Newgrange, Nowth and Douth, there's a collection of them actually, are perched high above a river, in this case the River Boyne. Boyne gets its name from Boann, the goddess Boann. All the rivers in Ireland have female names linking them to goddesses. The source for this more recently is Moncon McGann's his work, which I think you've, Betsy, been reviewing, Moncon McGann's work. No? Well, maybe it was somebody else. These are sacred gathering places with participants coming from various locations at certain times of the year linked to the lunar calendar. And in that sense, they are Irish sites of ritualistic assembly. There are other places that provide further evidence for this idea. Grange Stone Circle in County Limerick, which is beside Lochgar, and this is Lochgar, a photograph, not far from where Annie and I are in the summer. It's maybe 40 minutes away. And Drumbeg in County Cork has another magnificent stone circle. But O'Rear Dawn's work, the 1965 publication that I mentioned there, stone circles everywhere. And watch the names of the towns we're going to meet, the few that I'm going to talk about today, on Declan's Way. Because invariably, the name of the town has to do with some Neolithic or prehistoric welcome. Like many other strategies to incorporate pre-existing pagan or Druidic practices, Christians incorporated and established community-based traditions and rituals and built on these earlier ones. And there is the link to Bob's talk. Bob Marr was professor in Hampshire College here locally, great friend to the Amherst Irish, and this is his area. He goes to Ireland all the time. He's actually written a beautiful book with his wife Betsy on travels in Ireland. Beautiful writer too. Okay, so pilgrimage. Pilgrimage always implies journey, and as I said to you, the word in Irish or in Gaelic is turas, and turas is also the generic word for journey. There's always physical effort involved, an experience of some hardship in terms of getting there, pushing the body, to endure encounters with the elements. And again, this is my reference earlier to the Celtic spirituality. It's immersing oneself in the elemental and embodying whatever it is that occurs with that exchange, that interaction, that reappreciation of the elemental, of the elements. And it's an opportunity to remember what it is to be simply human in the context of such greatness, Mother Nature, that we cannot fully understand or control. Key to being on pilgrimage is to be away from the normal, the ordinary, the flow of the day-to-day existence, to unsettle the self. That is required in order to enter into a different place in the self, by having time alone on the pilgrimage, by meeting with people, by engaging in rituals along the way or at the final destination site, the gathering place, the place of assembly. There is much to be gained from getting away from all that is considered normal, to re-evaluate what it is that constitutes a life, a culture, a society, especially in these times as we emerge from COVID-19 pandemic. The anthropologist Wade David, in his beautiful book, The Wayfinders, published in 2009, puts it best when he reminds us, and I think it's up there, it is, yeah. The social world in which we live does not exist in some absolute sense, but rather is simply one model of reality, the consequence of one set of intellectual and spiritual choices that our particular cultural lineage made. The Latin, do I have it up there? I do. Solvitur ambulando, it is solved by walking. The Latin proverb seems apt to our discussion of pilgrimage or thaws. In the wake of the bubonic plague in the 14th century, Geoffrey Chaucer wrote the Canterbury Tales. It's a long poem about 31 pilgrims who get up to all sorts of different, but also share stories, and it's a storytelling competition as they travel from the Tabardin in Southwark to the shrine of St. Thomas of Becket in Canterbury. It's in Old English, and I've asked Annie, who knew it off by heart, to provide the opening lines. So here you go. Let's hope the technology is with us here now.
Here beginneth the book of the Tales of Canterbury. One that April with Shora Sota, the Drochta March of Parsed till the Rota, and bothered every vine in such becour, of which virtue engendered is the floor. One Zephyrus eke with his sweet breath, in spirit hath in every holt and haste the tender croppus, and the young Asana hath in the ram his halvacores urana, and smaller fools macan melodia, that sleep in all the nicht with open ear, so pricketh him in her courages. Then longing folk to go on pilgrimages, and Pomeroys for to seek him strong to strandas, to fair na hallways, couth in sundry landes. And specially from every shear's enda of England to Canterbury they wenda, the holy blissful march of for to seeka, that him hath holpen one that they were seeka.
I got a few words. Tea and scones, get in touch with Annie and she'll translate the whole thing.
Here beginneth the book of the Tales of Canterbury.
Get on to the next slide. There we go. Okay. To walk in the landscape. Again, the words of John O'Donoghue here. Anybody who's read John O'Donoghue's work? Right, quite a number of people. He also has a beautiful voice. He was born in Clare. And if you listen to him, he's talking like this, and it's like the energy is flowing. And a great man. But his line, I think, is a great one, that one of the lovely ways to pray is to take your body out into the landscape. So whatever you pray to or however you seek to explore your own spirituality, the landscape always somehow nurtures us, renews us, and enables us. So that's John. Okay, purpose, the purpose of pilgrimage, the motives. There may be different motives for the pilgrimage, of course. Some see it as a rite of passage, an event or a process that marks the transition from child to adulthood, or it may be part of a grieving process to mark the passage of a loved one, or to seek help with healing, emotionally or physically, from some dis-ease, or to link with the ancestors, those who have died or gone to the Oitella. I always feel that when I'm walking around Lismore in Ireland, in parts of the land where my people came from. Pilgrimage can also be understood as a form of penance for wrongs inflicted, or an effort to repair a relationship through nature after some rupture. Ultimately, though, the aim is to enter a different place in the self, while also encountering others along the pilgrim route and understanding the frailty of our humanness, and that we are all flawed and that we will mess up and have to come back to ourselves at different points in our lives, or to shed an old identity that defines one in normal life, and to emerge from the pilgrimage renewed and transformed in some way. If nothing else, maybe a few pounds lighter. There's somebody trying to reverse out, I think. Okay, here we come to the Celts, and I'm drawing on Sean O'Donnell's work here, and then building my own point from his work. According to Father Sean O'Donnell, the origins of the Celtic peoples are obscure, but that the general belief is that they gradually evolved from a basic Indo-European race inhabiting much of mainland Europe in about 1000 BC. O'Donnell reminds us that with the rise of the Roman Empire, the Celts were forced further westwards to 7 tiny areas in Western Europe: Ireland, Scotland, the Isle of Man, Wales, Cornwall, Brittany, and northern Spain, Galicia. To a limited extent, Celtic languages and culture are still preserved there. Though the languages are very different. If you hear Breton and Scots Gaelic, Jonathan and Amanda, our language teachers, know this language, but you can get some traces of the transfer. But they evolved. I mean, we're talking about 1000 BC. There's a lot of time there for a language and a culture to diversify and evolve. More than anything, though, we must remember, and Father O'Donnell reminds us of this, that the Celts were Muintir na Tuatha. Muintir na Tuatha, have I have up there? I do. People of the land. They were Muintir na Tuatha, who favoured small tribal communities with a strong belief in the other world, or the Oit Ella, as it's called in the Irish language. Oit being place, Ella being other, the other place. So there's this place, and then there's the other place. You know, no big. Theirs was a tradition of outdoor rituals in oak groves, at wells, with the prestigious learned class of druids or fili, again remembering that elemental spirituality. They came to Ireland after the megalithic people, the builders of the stone tombs and the circles, and so those two cultures blended. So that's the bit we need to kind of remember, the blending. And with the culture of the goddess was foregrounded, Eru being the old name for Ireland, Aoife the IRE, which is still on your passport or it's on any of the official documentation. Okay, so at last we come to Declan. This is from the Declan's Way flyer. You can see they've got his round tower and some beautifully designed flyers. They're copying a lot of what's done with the Camino. They have a little. The important thing to remember here is that this is an ancient route from Ardmore, 4th century, right? Ancient route from Ardmore up to Cashel. But during COVID, the local communities along it were desperate to get outdoors, of course. And so they realised, we've got this on our doorstep. So there's been this lovely interest, again, in preserving and protecting and enabling others to avail of this lovely route through all of these communities. So if COVID tested all of us, and it did, and it just still does, some people, we must remember that some other benefits emerged from it as well. So it's 72 miles long, and it goes from Cashel to Ardmore, and it has 5 stages. I'm just going to talk about a few of the places en route. Cashel. Cashel, the actual Irish word, means stone or ring fort. I rest my case. Returning to the earlier discussion regarding the blending of the pagan and the Christian, the presence of an ancient sacred site alongside Christian ones, we know that there's one such site very close to Cashel. The castle itself soars 200 feet up high in the air with a round tower 90 feet high. And this was the seat of the High Kings of Munster until the Anglo-Norman invasion in 1170. So this was the most important place in terms of power. Patrick was sent to convert these Irish leaders, even though Declan was already in situ in Lismore. And of course, the legend is that Patrick banishes the snakes, which we know from my talk about Bridget, were the symbols of gynocentric or women-centered spirituality and power. According to Mary Condren, that wonderful theologian, The Serpent and the Gods, is her book. I always wonder, was it the case that the blow-in from Wales, Patrick, was more likely to convert the Gaelic lords than the local lad, Declan, from Ardmore? Anyway, kings associated with the Rock of Cashel, Angus was the first ever Christian to be converted, and he was baptised by Patrick in 432 AD. The castle is comprised of a 5th century base built on this in the 12th and 13th century, and it's a huge tourist attraction. Anybody been there to Cashel? Whoa, right, okay. So you know how impressive it is and how commanding it is on the landscape. It's up an elevated site. Here's an interesting one though, all the more for those of you who've been there. In November 2022, there was a planning application to erect a hotel inside the castle, a move strongly resisted by archaeologists, but is still being talked about. The dollars and the tourists, in this case the euros and the tourists. Anyway, continue. Places en route. The next place, care. Care, again, the Irish word for care, it comes from Irish word for stone ring fort. It's located on the River Suir.
Well.
And there are 3 rivers, the Barrow, the Nore and the Suir. They meet and join the ocean at Waterford. The abbey at Care dates from about the 12th century and was later home of the Butlers, again Normans, de Butler. Remember the Norman invasion in 1170, that's when we see really the transformation of the Gaelic lords and the takeover by the Normans. Quakers came here in 1833 to engage in milling, and Charles Bianconi commenced his stagecoach services between Clonmel and Care and Cashel in the 19th century. There you go, Bianconi. All right, Ard Fionn or Ard Finnan. It means Fionnán's height. Again, we're talking about how they position themselves within the landscape to determine a place of not only protection, but also commanding views and so forth. But Ard Finnan is a tiny little village of 500 people. It's on the River Suir. And it has a 7th century abbey that was founded by St. Finian Lubber is leper. He was considered the saint of the lepers. There was a leper colony in Ard Finnan. In fact, I've recently learned that Lismore, where we are, also had a leper colony. So they are much more prevalent than I imagined, but I don't know much more about it. Again, it's located high up from the river, and the abbey was plundered by the Anglo-Normans, who built a castle, which is actually a sister castle to the one in Lismore, which will be the next stop on Declan's Way, and a beautiful 13-arch bridge crossing from one side of Ard Finnan to the other. Wooden mills there and milling over the years. Wherever you have a river, it's the same here. We've milling for paper or textile, whatever, power. Lismore. So Lis, the place of the great fort. Others would say Lis could be fairy fort. So that's to be disputed. Anyway, in 633, Mokua is his name, and his monks arrived to Lismore and established a monastery on the banks of the Blackwater River. The Blackwater River's name in Irish is Awan Mora, which is the river of the goddess Mora. And in fact, Chip Costello is one of our members and an Irish language teacher over at Elms, is great connections with Kerry, and he was telling me, and I've heard this too, in Kerry they often say Mora with their margin, when they're greeting you, they don't say Díagláin, which is God be with you. They say Móra chuit ar maidin. And I've heard this, let Móra be with you this day. So may the goddess Móra be with you. So anyway, this is the name of the Blackwater. And the monastery at Lismore was noted for its learning. And Catholics from the royal families of Europe sent their sons to be educated there. Remember, these were impermanent structures, these monasteries, and they were very much about being close to the communities. Again, Bob Marr speaks about this with great authority. Lismore again. Prince John, King of England, erected the castle on the site of the former monastery, and in 1581 the castle and its lands were granted, as you do, to Sir Walter Raleigh. And from him the property passed to Richard Boyle in 1602. Later the founder of modern chemistry, Boyle's Law, was born here in 1627 for this tiny little town. The castle passed to the 4th Duke of Devonshire in 1753, and it is still the Irish residents of the Devonshires, who are second in wealth only to the Windsors. So there you go. J.F. Kennedy's sister married one of the Devonshires, and she became part of that family, so that he visited Lismore when he was a congressman, and later he visited twice in his very short lifetime. So an amazing connection for such a tiny little bit. Actually, Charles and Diana come over regularly. It's not as if I'm laying out any red carpet on that one. But anyway, continue on. So the Dukes of Devon, but they have a very good reputation in the town. Why? Because during the famine they were good landlords. Right? So that made all the difference in that, and that lives on in memory, remembering the famine 1840s. Okay, Blackwater River, I said it was about the goddess Móra. The important word here is Daisha. Daisha territory refers to a very earlier people called Nadeshi Muan, and the area is still called Daisha. If they're playing in the hurling, Waterford do fantastic in the hurling, and it's all the stickers on the cars are up the Daisha, up the Daisha, up the Daisha. So something that ancient is still alive and used in current society. Christianity comes to the Daisha from the European continent before St. Patrick, and St. Declan was regarded as the apostle of the Daisha. This image is not mine, it's from a site about St. Declan, and I notice I haven't triggered it, so my apologies there, I'll address that. So St. Declan, between 350 and 450 AD, I was thinking 100 years, he couldn't, they died young then. But again, we're talking about, you know, how reliable are our sources and so forth. So I always think Fín Scéalta are legends, Fín Scéalta, there you kind of have to move with things and allow a little bit of latitude. It is believed that he was of the royal dynasty of Daisha Muan, studied in Rome and was ordained a bishop, returned where Patrick was converting the people, and they met in Cashel to agree on territories of influence. This is according to them. So all I say to my students who I'm teaching, always follow the money. Whatever it is. So anyway, it's like a good detective novel, right? They meet in Cashel, and Declan travels from Ardmore with his monks to Cashel to negotiate terms. He walks this path, and this path has now been renewed and revitalised and taken care of by the communities along the way. This is what the monastery looks like. The photograph is by John Barabbas. You see the tall round tower, which gives you again protection, viewing from out. You'll see one of these in Clonmacnoise, which is in the centre of Ireland. Anybody know about Clonmacnoise? Again, yeah, a major monastic area. Beautiful round tower. He also has a well, and there's a lovely walk around the headland from Ardmore. Ardmore it's just really beautiful. And his feast day is July 24th, when people come and they drink water from the well, but they also take some water away, you know, to use at home. So it is a place associated with healing and protection. Declan is the Patrick of the Déisi, and the Déisi belong to Declan forever. property, mine. Okay, so from Declan, I wanted to mention, not all of you may be up to 72 miles of a pilgrimage, and I don't know if I'm going to make it either, but anyway. I thought I'd end with two examples of one of a Camino by sea, which is done by somebody I knew tangentially at least, and then to offer you another source that you might follow up in, somebody who's doing some work locally and into the future. So this is Danny Sheehy on the left. Danny Dol Machan Sheehy. He's from Ballinarteirig in County Kerry, a beautiful Irish language poet, teacher. He had just retired and he decided he wanted to do a Camino by boat. Now if you've ever seen a curragh or a návóg, it's a wooden structure with canvas tarred over. That's it. So they're going to go from Kerry all the way to the Camino to Spain, to the northern Spain, right? And TG Cahir, which is the Irish language television station, T and a G and a 4, fantastic station. They did a documentary, and I'm going to give you the site of the information on that on the next slide. But they set out, I knew Danny because I did an Irish language course in 2015 with them, and he brought us just a gorgeous man and a beautiful poet and a really decent human being. Unfortunately, they just got to the coast and a huge wave collapsed the canvas boat and he died. Oh. But they made the documentary about him. The second lad in is Brandon of Dhéagláin, who's a well-known Kerry musician, box player. His brother just died actually, who's another well-known. Glenn Hansard is the guy at the next fella in. Do you remember with the beard? Once, if you ever saw the film Once, he's the guy who did that. And he was on, and the other lad is Kerry lad, Moriarty, I think, and he was the boat builder with Danny. Danny was a good one. So there's the information, screenireland.ie if you wanted to see it. I cannot recommend it enough. It's an amazing example of determination and working together. And they're rowing the whole way from Kerry to Spain. Okay. And here, I want to say, if you're ever interested in going to, some people have a very strong sort of interest in Christian Celtic spirituality, the blending of those two traditions. And nobody does this better, in my view, than the Torresbanana people. It's actually, they're doing one in the Golden Vale, which is, you see the picture? It's the very same picture as my one from earlier. It's Lochgar, which is close to the stone circle at Grange. So Grange was there by Lochgar, and then you have New Grange further up. So there's Grange and New Grange. So this predates the other one. So they're doing, clearly, this is coming up this year. It's hefty enough price-wise and so forth, but it's a family operation. Noreen is the mom. I know her, she's a great woman. She has lived on the grounds of the Glenstall Abbey. If you've heard of Glenstall Abbey, the monks of Glenstall Abbey, and she sings with them. And she was married to Micheál O'Sullivan, the composer and musician. Does that ring any bell? Anyway, they're a great musical family, and she has since left the Catholic Church and is a minister in some other, but she does still go with the Christian Celtic interest, blending, I suppose. But she's going to be in Krupala, out the road in Stockbridge. And look what she calls it. She calls it the Celtic Wheel of the Year. And as we know from my earlier slide about Father O'Dwayne, it's a calendar. It's the Celtic. It's a calendar of the seasons, if you like, of the periods. This is all Krupala.com, I think they are. Again, it's in the sources. So you can see you could avail of that if you wanted to. And I wanted to finish, there's Noreen in the middle, that's Owen on the right, he lives in Buffalo, New York. And Molly, Micheál is the son on the left, he's living in Ireland. But They do these trips all the time, either in Kerry or in the Golden Vale, and it is a combination of music, history, singing, spirituality, and so forth. Very rich. And I'm going to see if I can end with a song for you from the three of them. A very old song in the Irish tradition, Saura Saura, Banya Magona, which is Summer Summer is coming ahead. And let me see if we can get them. Bear with me, and I'll... the joys. Thank God at least I'm not on Zoom. I had enough Zoom to do me for a lifetime. Okay, let's see how we go here. Okay, let's see.
Come and join us in Clare Castle on the Golden Vale Trust Dawn.
Agus cinnte tá cuire that convectly in Amsa, and we are promising you a great adventure, an adventure into yourself too, a pilgrimage, much more so than a tour, and where we will be dancing. There's an ancient 15th century poem that says, "Come dance with me in Ireland," and no matter how you take that up, dancing, it is dancing in the heart. So come with us and dance with the heart in your own space and with us.
It'll be summertime, so we'll be singing a song.
We will. Okay. But one of the oldest songs we have on around Saura, Saura, the summer. And we'll sing you two different little versions of that. Saura, Saura, Banya Magona, Saura Lin, Saura we Olin, Rena, Ogamarena, Saura Lin, Saura, Saura, Bailarana, Ogamarena, Saura Lin, Saura we Olin, Rena, Ogamarena, Saura Lin.
Any questions?
What did St. Declan do to become a saint? What is his sainthood?
Conferred.
Yeah,
But that's from Rome.
yeah.
Yeah, so Rome would have conferred the sainty. We had this issue with Bridget, because in 1960, I didn't know this, Bob Marr tells us, that Bridget was no longer a saint from 1969, Rome and the Vatican decided. So it always happens in Rome, that's the happening place. That's as much as I know, Betsy, but a great question. Any other?
Yeah, so I'm just reading a book right now about a gentleman, Colin, and I can't think of his last name, who wrote a book, Walking the Border.
Oh,
Yeah.
hold on. It's the Colin Tobin.
Yes, yes.
Colin Tobin.
So he's talking about...
He's the one who wrote Brooklyn, the novel
Yes,
Brooklyn,
yes.
same guy.
So I'm reading this now, and right where I am, now Bill's already read the book ahead of me, but I'm up to where he's going to walk to Lough Derg.
Lough Derg, yes, another major place of pilgrimage.
Yeah, I haven't done to that yet.
Have you spotted it, Bill? Anything about Lough Derg to remind us?
But he didn't really partake in the whole pilgrimage. He had got to the island, and after a couple of days decided it was too rough for him, so he kind of started cheating on eating. And he didn't go to all the stations of they do stations every day.
Stations of the Cross,
Right.
yes.
But
Yeah.
He's Scottish. He gave up after a couple of stations and thought, a little bit too rough for him.
Okay. Yeah, Lough Derg, another major pilgrimage site. I just didn't mention it in the context of
By the way, you know, your pilgrimage is a lot longer if you speak of it in kilometers.
Believe me, I know. I'll start doing that for the brownie points. Sam?
How are the segments different every time? Like how far will you be walking? What's the longest walk?
The longest section is 18 miles from Ardfinnan, from Cahir over to Ardfinnan, and it's over the mountains. That's
So
the
a lot of
hardest.
elevation change as well.
Loads of elevation changes,
Ooh.
yeah.
Really
Yeah, so
train-
some of it is still along some roadway,
Yeah.
Because the roadways get built on, established routes and so forth. But that's the hardest one.
How do accommodations work while you're walking?
Oh, again, The site, www.stdeclansway.ie, has a whole host of B&Bs and so forth if people want to do it. When we're in Ireland, we're in Lismore, which is one of the places I mentioned. So Annie is our Uber for myself and Loretto. She's going to drop us off in the morning and pick us up in the evening. So we don't have to worry about lodgings. But if you wanted to do it, again, it's really supporting all of those communities that have revived the route. It's this lovely community enterprise. And of course there's music and history and there'll be a great welcome should you wish to do it. Start training now though, Jonathan.
And so what made you decide to do it now?
As I said at the opening, Kathleen, I feel like I'm emerging from the pandemic and I'm transitioning from teaching into writing. So I want to call on the great Mother Earth to support me in my transition. And I'm grateful, deeply grateful for having emerged from the triathlon. So there's gratitude and there's a wish for blessing in my new endeavour, if you like. And I'm sure Loretta and I will discuss many a thing. Okay, well, tea and okay,
You mentioned that, I think you said all the rivers in Ireland are named after women.
yes, goddesses.
What's behind that?
No, it's a very good poem. It's, you remember the book I referenced in the Bridget talk? It's called Mary Condon, Serpent and the Goddess. The gynocentric or woman-centered spirituality stroke religion was the dominant one in early Ireland. And that's why they say Patrick got rid of the snakes. The snakes were the symbol of gynocentric spirituality. So actually, Christianity coming to Ireland meant that it stepped out. And if you know the Sheila na Gigs, have you ever seen those ancient stone forms with the woman and her vulva is open?
Yeah.
They were often over the doors going into monasteries and things, so a reminder of. Watch that, that's where the power lay. It's so interesting, and it's still in the landscape. But as I say to the students, follow the money and follow the power because you'll always find something at the end of that. All right, tea and scones are ready to roll. You ready to go? Oh, sorry, no, wait, please,
no.
Tim has a few words. My apologies, Tim.
That's all right.
I'm offering the tea before I'm ready for you.
I have to say the thank yous at the end. So I want to thank Íde for a pretty great... I've been lucky enough to go to Ireland 3 times and Cashel twice, but now I have a whole list of other places that I didn't know that they led there, so Ardmore is now on the list. But in any case, so we also want to thank the consulate in Boston for having given us a grant to allow us to be able to carry on this program. Without them, we couldn't continue this, and the Consul General, Alicia Moore. And lastly, big announcement. Next month, our schedule is changing. What you have and what you've seen is now changed. We had to make a swap due to a problem here with the schedule at the church. And instead of having it on Sunday the 23rd, it's going to be on Saturday the 22nd, same time, 2 o'clock. And Bill Matthews will be here speaking about the Easter uprising. Anya Minogue is going to come in the month after, in May. So there's going to be a swap, and there's also going to be a swap of day. So I'll be putting out a notice for everyone to try, very shortly here, to try to give everyone a lot of advance notice to it. But this is the very first time we're going to be forced to move to a Saturday, as well as having to change what's on a printed schedule. So we want to get the word out there as soon as possible. Okay? Great.
Okay.